So I am recording this video on Sunday, January 2nd, 2022, and hope to post this video before the day is out. So this is my roundup of my 2021 film school curriculum. So what I have been doing every year for the past several years is, since I'm a filmmaker and a writer, I make a list of some of the greatest movies ever made, and I make my own list rather than consulting like the best of lists that uh, film organizations put together or that entertainment magazines put together, because a lot of times those lists are lacking in diversity. So every year I put together my own list. So this is part two of my review of the movies that I watched in 2021. For part one, either go to my YouTube channel if you're watching this on another platform, or if you're watching this video on my YouTube channel, just look in the description to this video because I will include the link to my previous video. So I will start at the end. The last movie I watched, and I made it just by the skin of my teeth. I wanted to conclude my film school curriculum for 2021 before the New Year's holiday weekend was over. New Year's 2022 holiday weekend was over. And I just made it by the skin of my teeth, because what happens is every year I sort of forget sometimes about my list, about my film school curriculum, because it's not a formal, it's not like associated with a school or university. It's just my own self-made curriculum that I follow. And because, I'm so busy, I hold down a day job, and I work on a lot of other projects. I'm also a journalist and an author. A lot of times a week will go by or a couple weeks will go by, and I will have forgotten that, oh, I have this list of 50 movies that I need to go through. And actually I started out doing 100 movies, and I realized that is just way too much. And I thought 50 was a good pace because I can do one a week. And if I forget a week or two, there's a little bit of cushion. But every year there's this mad dash at the end of the year to catch up on all the movies that I've sort of been forgetting that I was supposed to watch. So this year, the final movie that I watched, actually just earlier today, was a movie that fits in my category that I do every year about people with disabilities, because those types of movies about people who have disabilities, are often missing from the best of the greatest movies ever made lists. So the last movie I watched was a 2013 Korean film called Miracle in Cell Number 7. Miracle in Cell Number 7 was directed by Lee Hwan Kyung. I believe that's how you pronounce his name, and I believe it's a man. So if I mess up the pronunciation or misgender the director, my apologies. But this movie is real. I found it really entertaining. I actually started watching it earlier in the week, and I found that with foreign films with subtitles, I cannot watch those after a certain hour, because especially if I like lay down, and a lot of times I do, like, lay in my bed and watch my Roku TV or lay on the couch. I have a big screen in my living room. So I find that if I start watching a foreign film after a certain hour, I will invariably fall asleep, because a lot of times they're slow moving and it requires you to kind of do work, which is, read the subtitles. This is not just with movies I watch at home. I actually went to the 2017 Cannes Film Festival to promote my documentary Lady Wrestler. You can see the poster in the background. And I was at the Grand Palais, and with the star of the movie, Isabelle Huppert. I wasn't with her, but she was in the theater. It was like this debut screening. And I actually fell asleep during that movie because the screening was late at night. So here I am in France at the Cannes Film Festival, falling asleep because I'm watching a foreign film late at night. So anyway, I was able to watch Miracle in Cell Number 7 in the late morning, early afternoon. And this movie is about a man with intellectual disabilities who is wrongfully accused of a crime, and he happens to be a single father. And so, spoiler alert, a lot of these reviews are going to have spoiler alerts, because a lot of these movies are years and years old. So it's not like I'm spoiling a new movie that just came out. But so the main character is a single father, and his daughter is shown as a little girl. And the little girl is, there's sort of some implausible plot twist. The little girl sort of mails herself to her father in jail after her father is convicted of this murder that he didn't commit. So the little girl spends some of the father's prison sentence. The father is on death row, but he's in what's like a jail. I don't know if this is how they do it in Korea, but it's not, you know, a jail. It's not a prison cell with like one or two people. It's a big holding tank like they have at jails, where several different prisoners are in the same cell. And the little girl mails herself in a big package, and is able to stay with her father for several days, it seems. And then later, the girl becomes a prosecuting attorney and is able to get her father posthumously exonerated. Now, this movie has some wild shifts in tone. It manages to be both a wacky comedy, a sentimental family drama, and a serious crime drama, and raises a lot of good issues about criminal justice reform and how this man with intellectual challenges was coerced into confessing because he didn't have good legal representation and the prosecutor was corrupt. And when his daughter grows up and becomes an attorney, she's able to expose these flaws in the system. So even though this movie has these wild tonal shifts, it's a very good movie, and I believe it's been remade a couple of different times, and I think it's been remade in English, but I watched what I think is the original Korean version, and I definitely recommend checking out Miracle in Cell Number 7. So now that I've talked about the last movie that I watched, I will rewind to the beginning of the year and talk about a movie that I watched early in the year, like late February, early March. One of the things I do with my self-made film school curriculum is I study a couple movies that show what not to do, like flop movies or movies that are like infamously bad, to study what not to do. And one of those movies that I studied this year is called Bolero, a 1984 movie directed by John Derek and starring Broderick. And this was nominated for a Golden Razzie. It may have even won. The Golden Razzies are like the Oscars of horrible movies. Now, Bolero is set in Spain, and it's about this woman, Broderick, who sort of is kind of caught between lovers and wants to have these romantic adventures. And, you know, the story is not actually all that bad. It's just that the script really needed some work because it's very disjointed. And there's one scene especially that's just horrible, where Broderick has been kidnapped by this Arabian sheik who wants her for himself. And he kidnaps her from this Spanish bullfighter that Broderick's character has fallen in love with. And Broderick tells him, "I'm sorry, but I have to do something for myself," and then jumps out of the plane without a parachute and doesn't suffer any injuries. So the movie is just really absurd. So I can see why it won the Golden Razzies, but I would definitely recommend studying bad movies because it's important to learn as filmmakers just as much what not to do as what to do when you're trying to make a movie. In fact, that may even be more important, is what to avoid and what not to do. Another movie I watched early in the year in 2021, actually in February 2021, is 12 Monkeys. I had never seen this sci-fi drama directed by Terry Gilliam, one of my favorite directors. When I was a kid, Time Bandits, one of the movies he directed, was one of my favorite movies, although it kind of scared me because anything supernatural scares me. And Time Bandits has a character that's basically the devil called Evil. But anyway, back to 12 Monkeys. It stars Bruce Willis and Brad Pitt, who are like inmates in some kind of psychological institution. And they are trying to save the world from this deadly virus, which was really weird watching this in the pandemic. I didn't specifically choose this movie because the plot revolves around a deadly virus. It was sort of just a weird coincidence. And Brad Pitt and Bruce Willis are sort of time traveling and trying to convince the people who run the asylum that they need to be let out so they can help save the world and warn people about this deadly virus. So 12 Monkeys was highly entertaining and a little scary considering what's been going on in the world the past couple years. but I really enjoyed watching it. A movie I watched in the middle of the year in May of 2021 was Lorenzo's Oil, the 1992 drama directed by George Miller and starring Susan Sarandon and Nick Nolte as the parents of a little boy. The title character is played by Zach O'Malley, and the title character Lorenzo develops this, what seems like some kind of autoimmune disorder or some kind of digestive disorder where it's hard for him to, I believe, digest certain proteins. This movie was so heart-wrenching and so well done. Zach O'Malley, I don't know if I didn't research whether he was nominated for an Oscar, but the way he acted out this painful condition was just, I mean, it was just visceral. You could just feel it. And Susan Sarandon was just gave her typical flawless, I want to say flawless performances as this mother who just refused to give up on her son, even when family members were telling her, look, just take your son off the ventilator and, put him out of his misery. Susan Sarandon refused to give up, and so did her husband, Nick Nolte. Nick Nolte is doing an Italian accent in this. He plays an Italian immigrant. And these devoted parents start doing their own research when the medical community kind of doesn't have the answers. And eventually they find a cure or a treatment that's effective. And pardon me, but I don't remember if Lorenzo's Oil is based on a true story, but it is one of the best medical dramas I've ever seen. It really, really, really is excellent. So if you get a chance, check out Lorenzo's Oil. Another movie I watched in the middle of 2021, in May of 2021, is the indie film On the Corner of Ego and Desire by Alex Ferrari. Now, those of us in the independent film world, Alex Ferrari is one of our heroes. He runs the very successful Indie Film Hustle podcast, actually several different podcasts about filmmaking and screenwriting and how to be your best self and realize your potential and realize your dreams. And Alex also started a streaming service called Indie Film Hustle TV, which I subscribe to, which is where I saw On the Corner of Ego and Desire. Now, the way Alex made this movie is sort of a blueprint for indie filmmakers who want to make a film and may not have a lot of resources. So the way I've heard Alex describe how he made this movie is that he just kind of used the resources he had. He went to the Sundance Film Festival, hired some actors, wrote a basic story outline, what he calls a scriptment, and basically told the actors to improvise, sort of like A Mighty Wind or Best in Show, that kind of mockumentary style of filmmaking. And it's really funny, really well made, excellently shot, excellent sound. Alex Ferrari plays himself in a couple scenes. On the Corner of Ego and Desire is something that all independent filmmakers should watch, about how to make a movie with quality cinematography and quality sound without breaking the bank or going into a whole lot of debt or delaying the project for years trying to get investors. If you get a chance, check out On the Corner of Ego and Desire. A movie I watched over the summer in August of 2021 is the movie Captain Phillips. Captain Phillips is a 2013 film directed by Paul Greengrass and starring Tom Hanks in the title role. And it's based on a true story about the captain of a cargo ship that is hijacked by Somalian pirates. It's very well made and the story is very gripping. There's a lot of action and a lot of tension. However, from what I read and some of the background videos I looked up on Captain Phillips, there's some dispute as to whether the real life Captain Phillips either, I don't want to say lied, but certain details were distorted in his autobiography or book about this incident. I would say if you plan to watch this movie, do your own research and you can decide for yourself if you think everything is accurate. But beyond that, if everything was totally accurate or not, I had a little bit of a problem as an African-American with yet another movie in which people of color are sort of villains. Now, the Somali pirates are they're not all evil. They're not portrayed as just one-dimensional evil. In fact, there's one character who is kind of sympathetic and kind of helps Captain Phillips. But I just kind of had a problem with, of all the stories that are out there, why make a movie about a white person being victimized by Black people? I think the movie is well made. So I'm not saying anything is wrong with the filmmaking aspect or the technical aspect or the storytelling aspect, aside from the inaccuracies or alleged inaccuracies. I just had a problem with portraying yet another story in which people of color are the villains, even if they are three-dimensional villains that are not completely evil. But I'd say watch Captain Phillips and decide for yourself what you think of it. A movie I watched as the year began to wind down, although it was still summer in September of 2021, is the excellent documentary Dolores, about legendary activist Dolores Huerta. It was directed by Peter Bratt, brother of acclaimed actor Benjamin Bratt, and it just tells about the life and work of Dolores Huerta and her working with Cesar Chavez to help champion farm workers' rights and women's rights. The movie also portrays Dolores's kind of gradual feminism, or gradual entree, if you will, into feminism, where she started out as kind of a conservative Catholic, even though she was working for, leftist movements to help workers' rights. She was against abortion, but she sort of evolved to support freedom of choice. So it was just really interesting seeing Dolores's evolution over the decades. And I found out many things I didn't know. But one interesting thing I found out is that Dolores is a mother, and her relationship with her children was really interesting. And some of her children, of course, felt kind of slighted, like she didn't spend enough time because she was always out working for other people's rights. Although they love and respect her mother, they sometimes felt like they didn't get enough attention. So Dolores is definitely a three-dimensional picture of this legend, this icon, and I would definitely recommend checking out Dolores. I saw it on Amazon Prime, and hopefully you get a chance to watch it as well. A movie I watched in the fall is another movie about people with disabilities called The Road Within. I watched this in November 2021. The Road Within is a 2014 film directed by Gren Wells and starring Robert Sheehan, Zoe Kravitz, Robert Patrick, Dev Patel, and Kira Sedgwick. This movie is about a trio of young people who have developmental disabilities or emotional disabilities or emotional issues. Robert Sheehan has Tourette syndrome, Zoe Kravitz has an eating disorder, and Dev Patel has obsessive compulsive disorder. And they end up going on a road trip, like escaping from the facility that they're all getting treatment at. And Kira Sedgwick plays their therapist, who goes on to pursue them to try to bring them back, along with Robert Patrick, who plays Robert Sheehan's father, who's like this politician who's campaigning, and he has to leave the campaign trail to go track down his son. I thought The Road Within was entertaining, as well as it has an important message about people who are different or who have disabilities or emotional issues should be treated with compassion. But there were some issues I saw with how the characters were developed. So Robert Sheehan, the portrayal of Tourette syndrome. Now, I am no medical expert. I know nothing about Tourette syndrome, but I've heard that the stereotype that we all have about Tourette syndrome, that it's like basically just randomly shouting out curse words or randomly saying curse words, is not exactly how the disease manifests itself, but that's how Robert Sheehan plays it. But he also just randomly says curse words and, vile, filthy things that would be offensive if he didn't have, well, they are offensive, but people seem to understand because he has this condition, they don't take it seriously. And Zoe Kravitz is sort of playing this, she seems like she's playing herself, sort of this bohemian, very laid back, very cool girl kind of character that she would, I don't know her, but it would seem that that's how she is in real life. That's how her mother, Lisa Bonet, seems to be. Her father, Lenny Kravitz, is also very cool and laid back. And Zoe Kravitz seems to be playing a variation of this trope, and I don't remember the exact name of the trope, but the like fairy pixie girl, something like that, where a woman who sort of is like fanciful and a free spirit, helps an uptight guy kind of loosen up. And that's what seems to be the case with Zoe Kravitz and her romance with Robert Sheehan, is that she's this laid back girl who convinces Robert Sheehan to kind of defy his uptight father. And you just see this character kind of a lot. And I thought that was a little, I don't want to say problematic, but it was just a little bit, kind of a little trite. And the issues with how Tourette syndrome are portrayed, I wasn't sure was completely accurate. But other than that, The Road Within is definitely an entertaining movie. I saw it on YouTube, and I think it's available other places as well if you want to check it out for yourself. In my film school curriculum, I always include books and plays that were turned into movies. So I really try to study and learn how books and plays are adapted to the big screen. So If Beale Street Could Talk is one of the best. If Beale Street Could Talk is a 2018 film adaptation of the James Baldwin novel, starring Regina King in an Oscar-winning role, as well as Kiki Lane, Coleman Domingo, and Stephan James. Now, an interesting little tidbit is that when I was watching this movie, I kept looking at Stephan James's character and thinking, I know I've seen this actor somewhere before. I can't place him. At first, I thought it was Kid Cudi, a rapper turned actor who is from my home state of Ohio. He's from Cleveland. And then I, of course, finally looked it up online and saw that it was Stephan James and realized I had actually interviewed Stephan James as a journalist when he played Jesse Owens, who went to my alma mater, Ohio State. And they had a debut, a premiere at the Mershon Auditorium on the campus of Ohio State. And I covered that premiere as a journalist. And I interviewed Stephan James. So I stood, this was back in whenever that movie Race about Jesse Owens was released. This was, I think, 2015 maybe. So I stood right across from Stephan James. So no wonder he looked familiar. But If Beale Street Could Talk is an excellent, first of all, it's an excellent book. I listened to it on audiobook. The novel is told in first person from a woman's perspective, the Kiki Lane character's perspective, but James Baldwin, being a man, did an excellent job putting himself in the mind of a woman. And there's so much, if you grew up in Black culture, if you're African American like me, so much that you find relatable about the lingo and the dialogue. And I have to say, when I first watched this movie, I watched the movie before I listened to the audiobook. I'd actually planned to read the book and then just kind of ran out of time as the year started to wind down. So I went ahead and watched the movie first. And there's a scene, a big confrontation scene between Regina King's character and Kiki Lane and another family, the family of Stephan James's character. Kiki Lane and Stephan James are a couple who are expecting a baby. And Stephan James has been accused of a crime, wrongfully accused of a crime. And there's this big confrontation scene. And I was like, oh my God, this is horrible. This is like the Real Housewives or something. And then after I listened to the audiobook, it gave me more context that James Baldwin was just trying to capture how African Americans and, kind of code switch, like 1 minute we can be talking in, so-called proper English, but the next minute, when we're around each other, we'll just kind of let our guard down and kind of let it all hang loose. So If Beale Street Could Talk is one of the best book to screen film adaptations. I highly recommend checking it out if you haven't already. Excellent, excellent movie. Now, another movie I watched in November is Dead Presidents, the 1995 film by the Hughes brothers. I was so impressed with Dead Presidents that I actually filmed a review right after I watched it. So here is that review that I filmed on a separate day. Now, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and I was a child in the 70s, but I mainly grew up in the 80s and 90s. And anyone who grew up in that era knows that there was a series of movies released in the 90s that I call hood movies. They were actually parodied by the Wayans brothers movie, Don't Be a Menace to South Central while drinking your juice in the hood, because there were these movies that were released, it seemed like every single year, multiple hood movies throughout the 90s that were inspired, of course, by hip hop and featuring people in the inner city. And they had a lot of violence and, drug dealing, sort of like a renaissance of the blaxploitation era of the 70s, sort of a new spin on that. And I very quickly got tired of the hood movies because I felt like some of them promoted stereotypes. So I was kind of turned off by Dead Presidents. The poster, which shows the main character played by Lawrence Tate in whiteface holding a gun. Um, I assumed he was about to go commit some kind of crime. That always turned me off. But I this year decided, okay, instead of indulging my preconceived notions, I should actually see what this movie is about. Because the Hughes brothers were very influential in, along with Spike Lee and other Black directors in, sort of this new wave of Black cinema. So I felt like I should at least check out Dead Presidents and see what it's about. And I'm so glad I did, because my mom is always telling me about something. It's not what you think it is. And Dead Presidents turned out to be not what I thought it was. It's not some, very simplistic urban movie that just glorifies crime and violence. What it is an exploration set in the 70s, and it does an excellent job capturing the look and feel of the 70s. It looks, I don't know what the budget was, but it looks very, very high budget. It's very well filmed. Has a lot of great 70s soul music. And of course, in the 90s, there was a lot of nostalgia for the 70s in the Black community. And this movie just captures that era so well. Has a lot of great actors in it. I mentioned Lawrence Tate, has Chris Tucker in it, being funny, but also being a bit serious. I believe the actor's name is Freddie Rodriguez, Latino actor, very talented. Jennifer Lewis plays Lawrence Tate's mother. There's Keith David, sort of playing a cast against type, playing kind of a villain. And Bushe Wright, who later went on to star in Blade. So it's a great cast, very well filmed, great costumes, great period piece. Dead Presidents is about the character played by Lawrence Tate, who is a Vietnam veteran, and they have a flashback, a couple of different flashbacks to Vietnam. And there is a lot of violence in those scenes, but it's not, to me, gratuitous. It's just it's showing war as hell. And so the movie is sort of a commentary on how veterans are not treated as well as they should be. A lot of, especially Black veterans, they're not given the benefits they're promised or that they're owed, and they end up working menial jobs and living in poverty, and are unable to support their families after they've served the country. So Dead Presidents really is a good commentary on the plight of veterans. It's a commentary on the socioeconomic factors that drive some people of color into crime. The movie ends with a big bank heist that goes wrong that Lawrence Tate's character gets involved in. Dead Presidents really does a good job of portraying these socioeconomic factors without being preachy. And I was really surprised at the ending that it's actually a very conservative message about crime doesn't pay. As I said, my preconceived notions was that Dead Presidents was going to glorify crime and drug dealing and that kind of thing. And it really doesn't. And there's some, there is some graphic violence, and there's some, sex scenes and some very crass language. But it's what I consider to be a realistic portrayal of, life in a city like New York, where there's a lot of poverty. So if you haven't seen Dead Presidents, I really, really recommend it. It's very well done. As I said, it's a foundational movie in the new wave of Black cinema that was ushered in the 90s. I applaud the Hughes brothers for a very well-made movie. And so definitely check out Dead Presidents. And I'm so glad I did. Another movie I watched in November 2021, November and December were busy months, because as the year began to wind down, I realized, oh my God, I got to try to get all these movies in that I haven't watched yet. I watched The Red Shoes, the 1948 classic. And the reason why I watched this movie is because I had come across this list of Spike Lee's movies that he encourages film students to study. Spike Lee, in addition to being a world famous filmmaker, also teaches film at NYU. So I thought, okay, I have to watch something that Spike Lee recommended. So I just sort of randomly picked The Red Shoes. I did not like it. I thought The Red Shoes was beautifully filmed, and it's no wonder that it won an Oscar for art direction. But it's based on a Hans Christian Andersen story. And for some reason, I just could not get into this story about this ballerina, and I couldn't really understand what was going on. I think there was some kind of love triangle or ill-fated romance or something like that. I just did not enjoy it at all. It's probably a movie I should go back and revisit because I was I think kind of like sleepy and a little irritable and had a lot to do on the Sunday that I watched it. So I was like trying to catch up on a whole bunch of stuff. And maybe I was just, grouchy and in a bad mood, and I should go back and watch it again. But the thing about this film school curriculum of mine, I'm going to revisit this for next year, is I think maybe I need to cut my list down even further. I started out with 100 movies, then cut it down to 50. Maybe I need to cut it down even further because a lot of times I don't have time to like really give each movie the time it needs to either slow down and not multitask and just sit and watch it. Or if I watch it once and don't like it or don't understand it, go back and watch it again. I actually did that with a couple movies this year, but I don't have time to do that with every movie being 50 movies and also trying to watch other movies that aren't on my film school curriculum. So maybe at some point I'll go back and watch The Red Shoes again, but I just personally did not like it at all the first time I saw it. Another movie I watched in November 2021 is Los Olvidados, The Young and the Damned, by famed Spanish filmmaker Luis Buñuel. And I've been into his work since I read this biography by John Baxter. He not only worked in his native Spain, but he also worked in Mexico and in France. And he's just a true international filmmaker. And I have to admit, with a lot of these movies on my list, it's sort of like eating your vegetables or eating your broccoli. It's something you know is good for you, but you don't really want to do. And a lot of times why I end up getting so behind on these movies and doing a mad dash at the end of the year to try to get everything in is because, like, when I come home from work, from my day job, especially on a weekend, the last thing I want to do is sit down and watch something that's quote unquote good for you, even though I'm a filmmaker and I know these movies will enrich me and teach me things about filmmaking and about cinema in general. But I really, even though I respect Luis Buñuel and am fascinated by his life, I really was not looking forward to watching Los Olvidados. I also am learning Spanish. So I watched this on a Thursday, which is a day I set aside to focus on Spanish learning. And I ended up being really enthralled by this story of, it's sort of like a Mexican Oliver Twist about this young boy in a Mexico City slum who gets caught up in crime. And it really shows how nobody is perfectly innocent. There's a blind sort of street musician who seems like he's victimized by this gang of boys that are running around. And then you later find out the blind man is like a child molester. Los Olvidados, The Young and the Damned, was really, really moving. And it just showed the effects of poverty and why it's important to have a social safety net that can help people get out of poverty. I went into The Young and the Damned, Los Olvidados, not really wanting to watch it, not wanting to watch a slow black and white movie from the 1950s. But once I got into it, I really enjoyed it. And I'm so glad I saw it. And I definitely recommend checking out Los Olvidados. I don't believe that it's commercially available to rent. I couldn't find it on Amazon Prime or some of the other streaming platforms, but I did find the original movie on YouTube to watch for free. Basically, somebody uploaded it. So that's how I was able to watch it. And if you get a chance to check it out, I would highly recommend it. The rest of these movies I'm going to talk about, I watched all in December. So I'm going to the rest of the movies from this point on are December movies. Now, one movie that I watched over holiday break when I had some time between Christmas and New Year's is India Song by Marguerite Duras. On my list, I always include films by women filmmakers because I feel like women should be championed more as filmmakers. And just like with Los Olvidados, I had trouble finding India Song available on mainstream streaming platforms. Luckily, I was able to find India Song on YouTube, but the version that was uploaded to YouTube was in French with Spanish subtitles. Now, fortunately, I've been studying Spanish for years and I know enough, I'm fluent enough where reading the subtitles, I was able to understand about 80% of the dialogue. And it's not a lot. India Song is an interesting movie because it's more like, it's not really a movie with a plot, which a lot of, artistic art house movies don't really have like your standard 3-act beginning, middle, and end plot structure. India Song is even more so free form. It's basically like a poem read by a female narrator with a series of images. So it's sort of like a visual poem or visual poetry, where a narrator is talking about some rich French people who were like ambassadors to India. And the movie actually takes place, I think, in the French countryside in like this big, beautiful mansion. So there are just like a series of shots, basically. Some of the shots are static, and some of the shots the camera sort of slowly zooming in. And I have to admit, it's another movie that like it's a little challenging to sit through because it's very slow moving, but it was very, very beautiful. And it just reinforced that film can be many different things. It can be your mainstream Hollywood movie with your typical color by numbers plot that can be very entertaining, like what they call popcorn movies. It can be art house movies like India Song that are basically like poetry captured on film. So India Song, I wish it was more widely available because it's a really, really captivating in its own way movie, and I just wish more people were able to see it. I always include several foreign films on my film school curriculum, and India Song is a foreign film, but that actually went in my category about female filmmakers. But one movie that did fall in my foreign filmmaker category is Rome Open City. Rome Open City was released in the United States in 1946 and was directed by the legendary Roberto Rossellini, who was married to Ingrid Bergman. I almost said Ingmar Bergman, but that's another filmmaker. Ingrid Bergman from Casablanca, and the father of Isabella Rossellini, who I had the pleasure of meeting one time when she came to a movie event at the Wexner Center for the Arts in my hometown of Columbus, Ohio. Anyway, getting back to Rome Open City, it's this really fascinating black and white movie about the Nazi occupation of Italy during World War II. And since this movie was released in 1946, I believe it was even made in 1945, like right after the war ended. I mean, it's just amazing that Roberto Rossellini was able to capture this experience of the war so soon after it happened. I mean, imagine someone making a movie about the pandemic, in 2021, like the year after it started. That would have been, if a mainstream big name director had done that in 2021 and was able to release it now in 2022, that would have been amazing. Rome Open City really shows the horrors of war, how even little boys running around the street end up getting involved in trying to fight the Nazis, and a priest ends up getting involved in trying to fight the Nazis. And even though it's in black and white and kind of slow moving, it's very well done. It has some kind of humorous and lighthearted moments. But the issues I had with Rome Open City is that one of the issues I had is the priest character kind of seemed like an oversimplification of the church's role in the war. Like the church was just like this, and I was raised Catholic. I grew up going to Catholic school, but it just was sort of like a romanticized the Catholic Church because this priest is sort of like an angel, just angelic, and it seems kind of one-dimensional, so virtuous that he's one-dimensional. And then there's a character who clearly is supposed to be a lesbian, and she's portrayed in a very negative light. She's like a traitor who helps out the Nazis. And in so many, especially older movies, gay characters are just portrayed as evil or corrupt, or they're portrayed as evil or corrupt, or they have some kind of tragic ending. And I just was kind of disappointed to see that in such a respected filmmaker. But Rome Open City is definitely worth watching. Another movie that I watched, another foreign film that I watched, and I actually watched this on New Year's Day, trying to get in all these movies, before the holiday weekend was over, was Come Back Africa, a 1959 film written and directed by Lionel Rogosin. This is a really, really moving movie about the horrors of apartheid, way before Nelson Mandela and before the anti-apartheid movement. It really shows how Black people living under this system of segregation were just subjected to these awful living conditions. And it's kind of hard to watch because it has a tragic ending, but it's very powerful. It has a lot of great music. There's actually some lighthearted scenes, And singer Miriam Makeba, the legendary South African singer, has a cameo singing in one of the scenes. So I enjoyed, I guess maybe enjoy is not the right word, but I'm glad I saw Comeback Africa. Apparently, it was sort of like a pseudo documentary. So apparently, Comeback Africa was made in secret. I don't know how it was made in secret because there's wide shots of people walking down the street. So the camera couldn't have been like a hidden camera, but apparently it was made in secret to show the horrors of apartheid. And it definitely does that, even though it's kind of hard to wrap my mind around how this movie was made in secret, where there's all these different camera angles and it's shot very much like a professional film, not like a, cinema verite hidden camera or something. And apparently there's a documentary about the making of Comeback Africa. And I definitely want to check that out from my local library to kind of get more background on it. But I would definitely recommend watching Comeback Africa. It's available on Amazon. That's where I saw it, on Amazon Prime Video. You have to pay to rent it, but it's definitely worth the rental for sure. Another foreign film I watched is the 1959 movie Black Orpheus. Now, this one is in beautiful color. So many of these older movies from the 50s are in black and white. Black Orpheus is an Afro-Brazilian retelling of the Greek myth about Orpheus and Eurydice. I think that's how you pronounce it, Eurydice. And the actor who plays Orpheus is Bruno Mello, and the actress who plays Eurydice is Marpessa Dawn. And these two actors are, first of all, very beautiful Black people, Black Brazilians, and they do a great job of telling this entertaining yet ultimately tragic story. It takes place during Carnival in Rio, and it's so colorful and so vibrant and so much beautiful music and beautiful costumes. Even though Black Orpheus is literally a Greek tragedy, there's a lot of really entertaining, funny, lighthearted moments, a lot of great music. It's just really entertaining seeing the big spectacle of Carnival in Rio. I heard an interview one time with someone who used to work with Prince, who said that one of Prince's favorite movies to watch was Black Orpheus. And I can see why, because first of all, it's full of music and color. And second of all, the lead actress, Marpessa Dawn, she very much resembles Vanity, Denise Matthews. So maybe that was one reason why Prince liked Black Orpheus so much. But it's an excellent movie. It won the Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film, and it also won the prestigious Palme d'Or, the highest honor at the Cannes Film Festival, and it's very well deserved. Black Orpheus is an excellent movie, and I could definitely see myself watching it again for sure. So a movie I watched right after Christmas is Torch Song Trilogy. I was able to find it on DVD at my local library. And Torch Song Trilogy is a 1988 film by Paul Bogart. It's hard to find. You can find DVDs. A lot of people have gotten rid of DVD players or never owned one in the first place as physical media starts to get phased out. But there are so many great films that can only be found on, some of them are only available on VHS. But at least I think you should keep a DVD player, because I wouldn't have been able to watch Torch Song Trilogy because it's not available on streaming anywhere. At least I couldn't find it on streaming. I could find the trailers and a few scenes on YouTube, but I couldn't find the whole movie. So this movie is starring Anne Bancroft, Matthew Broderick, and Harvey Fierstein, based on Harvey Fierstein's 3 plays, and hence the title, Torch Song Trilogy. Now, Torch Song Trilogy is about a gay man trying to find love, played by Harvey Fierstein. Well, first of all, Anne Bancroft she just turns in her usual excellent performance as Harvey Fierstein's complicated mother. She loves him, she shows him love and affection, but she's also very intolerant of his sexuality. But the person who I was really most impressed with in this movie is Matthew Broderick, because this movie came out in 1988, right after Ferris Bueller's Day Off. So what's interesting about Matthew Broderick to me is that, at least from my perspective, from what I can gather, he was never an official member of the Brat Pack, that group of 20-something actors, teen and 20-something actors in the 80s who worked with John Hughes and worked in other movies together, like Molly Ringwald and Rob Lowe and Andrew McCarthy. But Matthew Broderick was always kind of like in his own little category, because he started working before the Brat Pack became popular. I remember he was in War Games in, I believe, 1982. And I think he was Ali Sheedy, another Brat Packer, was in that. But then Matthew Broderick has always had this side of himself that does Broadway and is kind of more into theater and being more of a serious, versatile actor than trying to be a movie star. In the movie Torch Song Trilogy, Matthew Broderick plays Harvey Fierstein's husband who dies in this tragic, basically hate crime. And I can just imagine Matthew Broderick's representatives, his agents, tried to talk him out of doing this because coming off the heels of Ferris Bueller's Day Off, he probably could have had a career similar to Michael J. Fox, where he did a lot of mainstream comedies or gotten on a mainstream sitcom. You know, it was very taboo back then, and it's still not completely mainstream to play a gay character. I just am so impressed that someone like Matthew Broderick, who could have just taken the easy route, chose to do something so offbeat as this. Now, this movie is really touching. It's really well made, a lot of funny dialogue. It's Harvey Fierstein's star vehicle, but the person I was most impressed with was Matthew Broderick. So if you can come across Torch Song Trilogy some kind of way, if your local library has it, or I think you can buy it on DVD on Amazon, it's definitely worth buying. Torch Song Trilogy is definitely worth watching, if nothing else, for the performances. Another movie I watched about people with disabilities at the end of the year, in December 2021, is Give Me Liberty. I found this on DVD at my local library. Give Me Liberty is a 2019 film by Kirill Makanovsky, and it's about a shuttle driver who drives the shuttle with people with various ailments, like elderly people and people with disabilities. One of the characters is a young Black woman played by Lauren Lolo Spencer, who is in a wheelchair, but even though she's in a wheelchair, she's a very empowered character, very outspoken, very three-dimensional. In one scene, she'll be like telling off the shuttle driver for kind of going off course and not getting her to where she needs to go. But in the next scene, she'll be helping someone else with disabilities with something they need. So, but her character, her family, this young Black woman's family, was a bit stereotypical. If I had a criticism, they were kind of loud and seemed a little bit dysfunctional, which is, reality, definitely. But I was kind of like, did they really have to make this Black family so kind of loud and seemingly dysfunctional? And there's another very minor Black female character, a security guard, who is very much a stereotype. She's very much that like attitude having employee who doesn't want to work and won't look up from her phone and won't be helpful. I thought that character was totally stereotypical and didn't appreciate that. But other than that, I enjoyed Give Me Liberty. It shows the challenges that elderly people and people with disabilities, of how a lot of times they're just ignored or mistreated by society. So Give Me Liberty, I believe it won some awards at the Sundance Film Festival and a couple of other festivals. And I can see why, because it's a very, very well-made movie with three-dimensional characters. And except for those stereotypical issues that I mentioned, it's a movie that's worth watching for sure. A thriller that I watched that was on my list in 2021 is the 1996 movie Bound, directed by the Wachowskis, who went on, of course, to launch the successful Matrix franchise, and starring Jennifer Tilly and Gina Gershon. Bound is one of the most entertaining thrillers I have ever seen. It's about two women who are attracted to each other and end up having an affair. But the one woman, played by Jennifer Tilly, is in a relationship, sort of a relationship of convenience, with a gangster played by Joe Pantoliano. And the two women scheme to get this money that Joe Pantoliano is supposed to be laundering or doing some kind of errand for this mob boss, where it's like a couple $1 million. And it is just one of the most gripping thrillers. You from one moment to the next, you wonder, are these women going to get away with it? Are they going to end up getting killed or maimed? Great performances by Jennifer Tilly and Gina Gershon. If you get a chance to check out Bound, definitely do so. A movie I watched on New Year's Day on DVD is The Age of Innocence. Now, as I mentioned, I always try to include in my film school curriculum books that are adapted to movies. And I don't just try to pick the easiest, most commercial, easy to read or easy to read books or movies that are easy to watch. I try to pick things that are fairly challenging. And Age of Innocence, when I say challenging, this book and movie was extremely challenging for me. So what happened was I listened to the audiobook on Audible, and I joked that it was so boring that instead of being called Audible, it should be called Inaudible, because I literally almost fell asleep at the wheel while I was listening to this book. And I think it's because it's one of those old timey books, kind of like almost like Tolstoy, where there's so many different characters, and it's about these basically it's about New York high society in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So a world that I have nothing to do with and know nothing about, obviously. But I have a vivid imagination, and I can transport myself to almost any time period if it's written well enough. The classic novel actually won a Pulitzer Prize and was written by Edith Wharton, but it's just an old style kind of writing that is, I feel, kind of dry and outdated. There's a lot of Edith Wharton, even though she's celebrated as like this classic author, which rightfully so. This is a story that's an epic that, even though I didn't personally like it the first time I listened to it on audiobook, I can understand why it was celebrated, because the story itself is about a love triangle. And the story itself is actually interesting. It's just the way it's executed. I just found the writing dry and old fashioned. And Edith Wharton does a lot of things that modern day authors are discouraged not to do. Like, she uses a lot of adverbs, which you're not supposed to do, at least in modern day writing. She does this thing called head jumping, but there was at least one scene between the main character, this man and this woman, this couple, where she jumps from the man's perspective to the woman's perspective in the same scene, and you're not supposed to do that. It's a love triangle between this man and this woman and this rich countess who's lived most of her life in Europe, who returns to New York and tries to integrate herself into New York society, but she's rejected because she's either a divorcee or soon to be a divorcee. So the other thing about The Age of Innocence is the stakes aren't really high. The only thing that will happen to any of these characters, if, like, for example, the man ends up having an affair with the countess, is that they'll be ostracized by society. So I guess being ostracized by society was like the modern day equivalent of people not liking your posts on social media. Even being ostracized by society, these characters will still be rich and privileged. They just won't be invited to fancy dinners and fancy balls, and nobody will talk to them at the opera. So that was a little bit not that interesting to me. Getting into the film adaptation of The Age of Innocence, it's a 1993 film directed by one of the greatest directors of all time, Martin Scorsese, and starring Daniel Day-Lewis, Michelle Pfeiffer, and Winona Ryder. I actually enjoyed watching the movie. I have to admit, I enjoyed watching the movie, although I didn't like the audiobook the first time I listened to it. What happened was I bought the Cliff Notes, and you can see I still have the bookmark in the Cliff Notes. After I listened to the audiobook the first time and hated it, I was like, let me give this book another chance. So I bought the Cliff Notes and I read the chapter summary, and we'll go back and listen to each chapter after I read this chapter summary. And I still can't say I enjoyed listening to the audiobook, but I understood what was going on. And that's why I didn't like the book the first time, is because I found it hard to follow. So even though I'm a writer and I'd like to consider myself as intelligent, I need Cliff Notes for books like this that have so many different characters. And on one page, the character's called Ellen, and the next page, she's called Countess Walenska or whatever her name is. So I actually enjoyed watching the movie because it was after I read the Cliff Notes and after I listened to the audiobook a second time. And I actually enjoyed the movie because I could follow it and I understood what was going on. And as I said, this story about this love triangle in New York society, it's a good story in the sense that there is conflict. It's just the stakes aren't real high. And the book, I think the writing is a little bit outdated. But overall, I would recommend checking out The Age of Innocence for yourself and seeing if you agree with my opinion that the writing is old and stodgy. And the movie itself, if nothing else, is beautifully filmed, just like The Red Shoes. Beautiful cinematography, beautiful costumes, beautiful art direction. So the movie itself is like a work of art. The book, I'm kind of lukewarm on it, but check out The Age of Innocence for yourself. Now, the movie that I will close with is the documentary Lumiere and Company. Now, I posted an unboxing video because Lumiere and Company I've been trying to watch for years, but I could never find it because it's rare and out of print. And I finally found it on Amazon. It was available on Amazon before, but it was like almost $100. And I'm like, I'm a film buff, but I'm not paying $100 for a DVD. But finally, I found it for like 25 bucks. And so the DVD of Lumiere arrived right before New Year's. And here's my unboxing video that I posted opening the DVD of Lumiere and Company. So it is New Year's Day 2022. I am trying to finish up the film school curriculum I made for myself in 2021, which is a diverse list of movies to watch. And one of the movies that I could not find on any streaming service is called Lumiere and Company. And I think this Amazon package is the DVD I ordered. So this is the sort of unboxing of what I think is Lumiere and Company. So here it goes. Yes, Lumiere and Company. I think this is an interview with various directors like Spike Lee about their process. I always try to study the work of great directors, so I'm delving into this, and I will include this in my review of the movies that I studied for my film school curriculum in 2021. So the reason why I'm ending with Lumiere and Company is because it's about the history of cinema. Auguste and Louis Lumiere were pioneers in filmmaking, and this documentary, Lumiere and Company, does this wonderful, wonderful thing of taking the Lumiere's very first film camera and giving it to, loaning it, I should say, to movie directors all around the world, including American directors like Spike Lee and David Lynch, and has these directors film short films with the Lumiere's camera and talk about filmmaking and why they make films. This movie is just so innovative. And it's interesting how each filmmaker uses the Lumiere's camera. And I have to admit that my eyes sort of played tricks on me. Like the filmmakers who use the Lumiere's camera to photograph modern people wearing modern clothes and modern settings, it just looked like black and white video to me, like grainy black and white news footage, like maybe from the 60s at the oldest. But the filmmakers who use the Lumiere's camera to like film people in like old fashioned costumes or like timeless costumes that you could see in any generation. Like there's one filmmaker who films people in traditional Asian Indian garb. And there's another filmmaker who films at the Wall of China. So the movies that use older settings and older costumes really, to me, captured that classic cinema look of the early silent films. But the ones where they're just filming just random modern stuff, to me, just look like it could have been filmed on a cell phone and given like a filter to make it look like it was black and white. It's such an interesting experiment to see these filmmakers, these international filmmakers, and how they each interpret the Lumiere's work and how they were influenced by the Lumiere's. And I also watched the Lumiere's movie. It's just a short film about workers leaving a factory. But if you're able to come across Lumiere and Company, whether you find it on DVD or if it ends up eventually on streaming, definitely watch it because it's a time capsule about the history of cinema, and it's so, so important. And I'd love to know if you've seen some of these movies in the comments, or you can email me at chrisbornay@gmail.com. Let me know what you think of some of these movies and if you agree with my opinion or not. I love to have discussions about film. Thank you for watching and enjoy going to the movies and watching movies in 2022.